Okay, we're going live. We are there. Okay, good morning, everybody. This is your Senate Transportation Committee. It's Friday morning. And we're going to have a little discussion this morning on a couple of items. Our number one item first is brake inspections. And we're going to discuss the catalytic converters violations of that issue. So let's start off with the Senator Chipman. You want to take over this?
Sure. Maybe I'll set this up a little bit. And I'm really glad to have Bob on the call here. So I think it'll be a good discussion. I understand from other senators as well as from a lot of constituents that there's concerns about changes. I don't know when it was made. This is before my time, but I'm sure that'll come up in discussion. The changes of the brake pad inspections, and that I'm hearing from a lot of reasonable people that cars that sit idle, like snowbirders, when they come back and have to get their car inspected, if the car's been sitting idle for a while, they get a thin layer of rust onto the pads, which often fails the inspection, and that's raised concerns because they argue there's no good pads. But I know Bob Church has some specific examples of things that he'd recommend us to consider relating to brake pad inspections from other states. That's all I would set the table with, but I know Senator Perchlik might have some things to say on this.
We don't have a bill on this, so it's just a discussion you want to have, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, go right ahead, Bob. You want to take over this morning?
Really, to review here, my name is Bob Church. I'm the automotive science and technology teacher at Burlington Technical Center. I provided a 13-minute video as part of the testimony. Do you want me to play that, or do you want me to just summarize the content?
Do you want to watch a 13-minute video, or you want
Let's summarize it, probably.
Yeah, I think you could summarize it. I think you might want to, Bob, show the end of the video when you have
Sure.
the photo.
Sure. Yeah, I can do that. Let me see how I get that. Hang on one second.
You could explain the whole, the situation and what you've learned,
Sure.
but I think when we get into the details, you have some good.
Yeah, I mean, if Mike wanted to play that from the 9-minute mark, I'm not in. He's not letting me share my screen,
to make the codes?
but I can verbalize it
Okay.
as well.
Or can you send the video to us?
You did.
Okay, these are posted.
So that being said, I mean, that particular piece starts at the 9-minute mark, the summary. Basically, I've been hearing from folks for years about the inspection process. I mean, we've had folks who have accepted positions in our district that have moved from other parts of the country. And before they drive cross country, they have their technician inspect their car and look at it, and they drive to Vermont. And then when they get to Vermont, they have to meet a different criteria to get their car inspected. So they find themselves questioning the work, and it's been an issue. Vermont Public Radio had multiple segments on the issue of vehicle inspections, and I provided that in the links to that in the materials. Well worth your listen. The video testimony that I provides a basic overview of the braking system, the industry standards for measuring brake rotor minimum thickness, run out, and documents a case we had recently with a 2022 Acura MDX with 9,600 miles that went into a service facility, and because of Vermont's criteria, was required to fail the car for inspection because of the rust that was on the brake rotors. So what was interesting, as part of the DMV report, it said that the vehicle failed due to conditions of the brakes do not meet manufacturer specifications and or inspection requirements. And that's really the rub here. The vehicle manufacturers do not have a specification for rust. They have a rotor minimum thickness, rotor run out, and there is no provision for rust. So ultimately, the inconsistency between the manufacturer's criteria and Vermont's inspection criteria is of concern, because in order for this vehicle to meet Vermont's criteria, this particular vehicle, the manufacturer did not recommend a simple machining of the rotors. These rotors had to be replaced. So to meet the criteria, it cost this customer over $600. And it's a 2022 car. It's got 9,600 miles on it. And there was no brake performance issue. So in the video I mentioned, and in the materials that I provided, many states have eliminated their inspection program, vehicle safety inspection program altogether. Pennsylvania, who still runs a inspection program, has a specific provision in their inspection manual that basically, and I provided that link for you there too. It doesn't allow the vehicle to fail for rust in and of itself. So this particular customer lived in Pennsylvania, they would have not have had to spend the $650 to get the car inspected. So it's really that's part of it. And as you folks are looking at generating funds, one of the segments on the VPR edition was former Commissioner Robert Ide talking about the fees associated with the inspection. And when asked about dissolving the inspection process, one of the issues was related to the funds that are generated from it. So I included in your packets there as well a United States Government Accounting Office did a report on inspections, and there's two quotes that really stand out here. One is the National Highway Traffic and Safety Administration officials told the GAO they have adopted a hands-off approach to the state vehicle inspection programs because the agency devotes its resources primarily to areas that contribute more heavily to crashes, such as behavior, right? We see it all the time. People driving on the highway too fast, driving, they're texting. So the National Highway Traffic Safety folks decided to put their energies there. The report goes on to talk about among the 3 studies of U.S. vehicle inspection programs, none were able to establish a statistically significant effect on safety inspection programs on crashes involving either fatalities or injuries. So again, there's very little data that support it. So I think as we look at the broader picture, right? I mean, as far as raising funds for the transportation, and there's some issues. A lot of times the rust in particular, what we see often is the rear brakes, the rear brake rotors. A basic understanding of the car's brake is that the majority of braking is in the front. So we have cars with rear disc brakes. We have business folks telling us that every other year cars are needing to have rear brake work done to meet the Vermont's criteria, and that's the key here too. In that Vermont, the provision for rust is unique. If you were living in another state, you wouldn't have that in of itself. So I think the Pennsylvania language would be something to consider short term, but I honestly think long term, looking at the Government Accounting Office report and looking at the challenges we're facing to raise funds, there might be a way to look at a different revenue source for it and dissolve or decommission the safety inspection component. So,
Okay, question before we move on to someone. Okay, nothing else.
So Bob, I should have introduced you more in some of your background and how many years you've been teaching kids at the technical center, but maybe if you wanted to elaborate on that. But I just want to crystal, before I turn it back to you, crystallizing the issue is that right now I'm hearing from constituents in Williston and other senators as well that new brake pads with just a thin layer of dust that other states don't consider to be a safety issue are being failed and costing lots more money than they would expect for inspections. And so, Bob, I think what you're saying is proposing us to just consider some adjustments to the standards for inspection that might be more considerate of surface rust that might not have a safety implication. Is that correct, Bob? Or how would you react to that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'm 32 years in this program teaching automotive science and technology in Burlington. On a side note, many of our students utilize the automotive experience to gain careers as electricians, heating and ventilating. So it's one of our most famous Vermont educators, John Dewey, would talk about education through occupation, not for occupation. So our premise is to build those foundational skills. with regards to the rotor rust issue, I think Pennsylvania's language would suffice. I think it's a fair addition. It would be a tweak in a way. I mean, obviously, your folks at DMV could provide some testimony as well, but I think that's a fair piece. I do think, though, that when we look at the bigger picture and we look at the Government Accounting Office and the data with regards to the efficiencies and the results on safety inspections, I think we'd be better off. I mean, I think there's 12 states that currently still run these programs. You know, when we talk about brake inspections, most people have inspections when they're switching over their summer and winter tires and stuff. So, you know, we're talking about a segment of the population that, you know, generally speaking, are maintaining their cars. So,
Senator Kitchell, you have a question?
Yeah, I do. And that has to do with the revenues. Obviously, the stations are getting reimbursed for the inspections. And I know that the stickers come from DMV. What are we talking about? I didn't realize that this was a major revenue source to the department. Do we have any, is there anybody there? I'm sorry, I can't see if there's
We have a
anyone.
couple folks from DMV. I just,
Okay, well,
would like,
I think in other states, I look at New Jersey as an example. I was frankly surprised that they eliminated their safety inspection, because in Vermont, the case that I cite, they charge $69 for the inspection. I don't believe the state gets anywhere near that kind of revenue. The economic issues, though, are huge, right? Because if a car comes in and gets required brake work, in this case, $600, well, there's sales tax associated with that kind of revenue too. So the question comes down to is, you know, should this be done under the auspices of a vehicle inspection, right? I mean, that's how I see it. So I think that
someone from DMV would like to sit up here and just.
Yeah. My question is really to clarify the revenue impact to the department's budget, because
We're gonna have Scott there.
as opposed to the service station that is getting reimbursed for conducting the inspection.
Okay, we'll have it explained right now. Thank you.
All right, can you clarify the question for me?
Yeah,
Because I'm a little
Yes,
confused about a
but-
revenue source.
they gave us
Yes.
a sticker, but then the inspection is up to they get the
Yeah.
benefit.
I just wanted to clarify the extent to which the state of Vermont's revenues benefit from vehicle inspections. I know that the inspection stations are paid for making sure the car meets those inspections, and the money goes to the station. How much of money from inspection? Is it just the cost of the sticker? Is there in other words, what is the revenue to the state of Vermont as a result of having this requirement?
Yeah, to answer that question, first of all, to introduce myself,
Yes.
Scott Davidson, the Chief Inspector with the Department of Motor Vehicles. The actual revenue to the state of Vermont is $6 for the sticker. And that's the cost of the sticker, contracting, procurement, administrative staff support. And there's also a statutory requirement that $3 goes to the bridge fund as well. So the total per inspection that goes to the state of Vermont is $6.
Okay, 3 to DMV and 3 to, could you state where the other 3 goes again, please?
$3 will go to the T fund, the
T-
transportation
fund.
fund, and $3 will go to the bridge fund, which really is the same.
The rest pays the station for their half hour or whatever it takes to inspect the car, because they have to go through a 28 or 30 hour inspection. They have to take to go through it. If they find anything, that's their business, and they charge.
Okay, so it's a total of $6 gross, but there's obviously a cost to the state to have a system to
I don't think
produce
it's a
it.
money maker, because $6 and $3 is pay for the
No.
bill and everything else, and you
Yeah.
gotta go through it.
Yeah. No, okay, so this
And-
is more of a
business.
safety issue than a revenue issue, as it would for our discussions.
Yeah.
right, I would just add, that's a good point, the safety piece, and that's why I provided the Government Accounting Office with regards to the studies and how effective it actually is with regards to reducing fatalities or accidents on the road. Again, the National Highway Safety Administration found that, they're putting more of their eggs in the behavioral basket, if you will. So I just think it's as you're discussing these issues with revenue and process, to look at that data.
So now we're back to the issue about brake inspection. Is that correct? So maybe we could ask an explanation. I don't know the subject, but it's brake inspections, and you say they shouldn't. Go ahead.
I'd love some background. I understand some things changed a few years ago, and I think a lot of this has been around those changes, but I don't know much more than that.
All right, I just typed up a couple little notes here just to kind of give you that historical background. 2017, as you all know, we went to AVIP, Automated Vehicle Inspection Program, where we were able to collect electronic data, do things on a tablet, modernize and update the inspection process. With that, we also took the next step, which was to revamp and rewrite the periodic inspection manual. In 2017, we had 3 periodic inspection manuals totaling 567 pages. A lot of regulation. And what we did is we put together a team of Vermonters that consisted of folks with ASE certifications, factory certifications, large dealerships, small dealerships, members of the public. We had someone from House Transportation on our team. We had some other industry experts that specialized in specific areas within the inspection manual. And through that process, we rewrote the manual. We had many meetings, many hours going through each individual section of this 567 pages. And we debated and we discussed, and if we didn't have an answer or we didn't have enough information, we researched and came back to the group. We put a lot of time into it. The key factors is when we met with the team, when we put them together, there was well over a dozen folks that we had involved in this process. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to set ground rules. What are the goals? What do we want to accomplish here? The first thing was we wanted to remove all those things not critical to the safe operation of a vehicle. An example was front license plate. We didn't want our inspection mechanics failing a car because it didn't have a front license plate. If law enforcement wants to enforce that law, they can enforce that law, but it's not part of the inspection process. It's not part of the safe operation of a vehicle. There were many things, though, that we found that were in the manual that we really felt should have stayed in the manual, but weren't necessarily grounds for why we wanted to fail the vehicle, one of which was tinted windows, right? So tinted windows is still in the manual, although it doesn't involve the safe operation of a vehicle. It's in there now as a new category that we created to allow vehicles to pass inspection, but to educate the operator of a potential law violation. So when you get your car inspected now and you have tinted windows, you won't fail inspection. You'll get an advisory. And when they print the VIR, which is the inspection report at the conclusion of the inspection, it'll say you may be in violation of a section 1125 of Title 23 for having tinted windows on this vehicle. So the operator is now aware that they potentially have a violation. So we added that new category. So we didn't completely eliminate everything that was in the previous manual. Some of it moved to advisory if we deemed it not critical to the safe operation of the motor vehicle. The next thing we really wanted to do is we wanted to modernize, simplify, and clarify ambiguous language. So modernize, if you go into the manual now, you could actually go to tinted windows, click on section 1125, and it'll actually go to the statute, and you could read it. So that's now available within the manual. Simplify. We have 1,100 inspection stations in the state of Vermont. We have approximately 3,200 active inspection mechanics, all different levels of skill set. Some are ASE certified, some are factory certified, some of them just have on-the-job training. So the manual had to be written not to the highest level of mechanic ability and skill set, but to all levels. So we had to simplify it, we had to clarify it, and we had to have it make as much sense as possible. Now, to bring this all full circle, Rust was a perfect example of why we needed to rewrite the manual in some areas that we felt needed to be clarified. And to explain that in a little more detail, the old manual for brakes and drums and rotors used to read, rust or cracks exist on drum or contact surface. Rust. What is rust? Right? So what I did is I brought a couple of these here, just pictures. This is my pickup truck. This is my work truck, brand new truck. You can see on one of those rotors, rust. And that's just sitting over the weekend. That's just snow, rain, and in some cases, I've gone out after being on a week's vacation and that thing was completely orange. But the second picture that you see that's in there, that's right below it, is the same rotor. It's shiny. It's clear. That was after driving to Dunkin' Donuts exactly 1 mile from my house. That's called surface rust. That should not be grounds for failure. That is not failure
It
by.
rubs off as you drive in.
Yeah, it comes right off. Absolutely. And that is not grounds for failure. The next thing we put together is these are examples of what failure looks like. Okay, so this is an example of what a pitted rotor would look like, what delamination looks like, and what swelling looks like. And I even
Oh, we have props.
I even brought in visuals. There we go.
I thought he brought our lunch.
So if you take a look at the first rotor right here, and you run your finger over right here, this is swelling, okay? So what you see here would be grounds for failure. It's no longer shiny, it's no longer smooth, it's raised. You could actually feel it when you run your hand over it. So a 1/2 inch of this accumulated on both sides of the braking surface where the pad hits the actual rotor, that's grounds for failure. This is not surface rust. This will not come off with normal driving. Okay, so the next rotor.
Because it's bumpy, so the swelling is up.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the next rotor right here will show pitting. So if you run your finger over these right here, you can actually feel where there are almost like gouges in it, and that's pitting. So again, that shiny surface is now breaking down. The lamination is setting in as well. So these could be caused by a multitude of reasons. One, a buildup of rust from brine, from salt, or heat, friction, which could mean that the pads are worn down too low. It could mean a variety of different things. But where a 1/2 inch accumulative rust comes from, and why we use that as an example, is this is your braking pad, okay? So that braking pad, when affixed to the rotor like this, is going to clamp down and press on it. So this is how much of the pad that's actually striking that rotor. So if you take a 1/2 inch off of that, it's obviously going to affect the braking in a panic situation. You know, and if you wait another year for the next inspection, it could be more. So when you talk about manufacturer specs, you talk about manufactured as designed. When they design brakes and the pads and the rotors, they designed for all of this to be affixing to a smooth, shiny surface as the rotor is designed, as the pad is designed. So what we realized is rust couldn't be the standard. We couldn't just say rust because, again, we just talked about having 3,200 mechanics. Each one of them are going to interpret rust differently. So we defined in the new manual what rust was. And that definition is now swelling, delamination, and pitting, which is what we just showed. We showed the pitting, we showed the lamination, and we showed the rust buildup. So the 1/2 inch, that question comes up, well, where'd you come up with a 1/2 inch? Well, if you take a look at manufacturer specs, your BMW, your Mercedes, your Acura, your Ford, your Prius, they're not all the same. They're not all exactly the same. Your pads are going to be different, your rotors are a little different, and the manufacturers are all different. So rather than have a 567-page manual describing all the manufacturers, all the different rotors, and all the different manufacturer specs, we felt that a 1/2 inch cumulative rust was reasonable to say that on an average GMC pickup truck has 2.56 inches of braking surface, that a 1/2 inch cumulative rust would affect the vehicle's braking in a panic situation. And then to wait another year for another inspection, that rust will increase and further affect the braking. So we addressed the change in the manual to define rust, so it was clearer, it was simple, and it was easier to read. Now, as for doing the process, we did look at other states' manuals. We looked at NHTSA, we looked at AMVA's best practice, we consulted with ICAR, we consulted with numerous different trade organizations to discuss this topic. And if we needed clarity, we certainly sought it. But to use an example, Maine just rewrote their manual. They just redid the process that we finished in 2019. And it reads much like Vermont's, which it was kind of nice to see. And they used very much the same premise as we did for why they redid it. I'm going to read Maine's rejection criteria. Reject vehicle if the friction surface is contaminated with oil, grease, brake fluid, or is excessively rusted so the integrity of the drum or disc is compromised. So I like the way that reads. But if you're looking at 3,200 different mechanics at 32 different levels, you have 3,200 different interpretations of what excessive rust means. We tried to narrow that down so that wouldn't happen. So I would have disagreed with Maine with going with that, because that's kind of similar to what we said before in just saying rust. Orange on the ruster rotor does not mean rust. That surface rust comes off on a trip to Dunkin' Donuts, comes off on a steep hill backing down. So that was what we tried to clarify when we rewrote this manual, and we did what we did. And those were the improvements that.
How long does it take for that to get that happen? Is it something that's a yearly, 10 years, 2 years, 1 year?
The quality of brakes are different. Some come with a coating that would help protect it. I know my father's a snowbird, goes down to Florida, and he leaves his truck outside all winter. I just failed inspection because the backside of my rotor on one rotor had a 1/2 inch cumulative rust. And what I have, and I'll show you another picture. Let me see here.
Will it go like 5 years to 2 years?
Sometimes less. If you don't drive your car, I look at it like this. Like your body, you got to take it out for a walk and exercise. A car is really no different. If you let a car sit for a long period of time, things are going to dry up, things are going to crack, things are going to accumulate rust. You got to take them for a walk in order to be healthy. By taking that car just down to Dunkin' Donuts and back, I took off a whole fresh coat of rust that's not going to build up.
Right. But if you
There's also a protective guard. I think I have a picture of that on one of these.
why don't they shield it from the elements? Or was there some shield? They don't do that.
Well,
That's that factor.
you know, there's different environments in which to store the car. So if you have a car inside and it's high humidity, that's going to affect the rust versus having a dry storage area, right? So there's a lot of factors involved. So time, mileage, really depends on how the car is taken care of, how much it's driven, where it's stored, what elements it's involved to, what's the quality of the rotor. I know on my vehicle, I replaced the rotors. Actually, you can see the guard right here. It's a guard right here. So brine getting stuck, getting trapped back there, and then sitting in my garage because I drive my work car and not my personal car, probably affected why that rotor rusted. And I don't think I had over 10,000 miles on it.
Would that have failed?
What's that?
Would that have failed inspection?
No, absolutely not. No,
Shouldn't have failed
no,
inspection.
absolutely not. The only thing that would have failed inspection are these examples right here.
So Bob, so you're the brake guy. I mean, I think I've met you before online and all that. And every discussion that it has, oh, we got to talk to Bob Church. We got to talk to Bob Church. So seeing what you're seeing right now, does that all make sense, or is your concern deeper than that?
Yeah, no, I'd like to go back. I noticed Mike's put my share screen piece, so I'd like to share a couple things on that. First of all, with
Yep.
regards to the
Senator Burns, if you have a question? Oh, okay.
so this was the
I can wait for my question for later.
Okay. Thank you.
so this is the picture that was added to the DMV manual when they updated it. Okay, so this at least gives you the people that weren't able to see that picture a little bit of an understanding of what we're looking at with regards to the rust. If I'm just going to show this one segment here of the video because it shows the case study and it summarizes a little bit. So just bear with me here a second. So with the let's get this car up on the left and see what we got.
Okay, so now that we've got the car up
Can't
here,
see the
we're looking
video.
at the rotor. The outside looks fine.
You can't see the video if you're expecting us to see the video.
I'm sorry, you can't see that?
Nope, you gotta share your whole screen. You might have just shared this window.
Oh, okay. Bear with me.
I really appreciate taking this on, and I'd love to know, I'm sorry to jump in, using the downtime, that we hear from constituents. I'd be curious, since these changes come into effect, how much are you hearing from people? But maybe you can address that afterwards.
Oh, it's interesting. I respond to a lot of comments about the manual. And like I said, if I actually believe that all 3,200 of my mechanics agreed with every bit and every content within this manual, it would be, yeah, I would really have created an amazing piece. So do I hear about different areas of the manual? Absolutely. Brakes, absolutely. And like in this case, Bob brought these concerns and we sent an inspector down to educate the inspection station and to find out exactly, where they're at, and, what happened and why they came to the conclusion they came to. That's why I have a unit. So if someone is concerned that they failed and they shouldn't have, then we investigate and look into it. In a lot of cases, it's providing the education and the clarification. Same thing with going to your doctor. We've all gone to the doctor and we've gone for a second opinion because
Mike, could you start that video at the 9-minute mark? I'm for some reason not able to.
We were seeing it, Bob. It was up on the screen and then it went away and then it came back again and then it went away. You had it both ways.
Was it full screen then?
It was.
Okay, perfect.
We're not seeing it now, though.
Okay, yeah,
Now we see it.
okay.
Yep.
Press play.
Come over so we can have a better access to the inside. And when we look inside, you'll start to see, if we turn a light on here, you'll see where you have rust on the brake rotor. If we compare that to the other side of the car, the right side, you'll notice the right side, there is no rust. So to review, we have a 2022 Acura MDX with 9,676 miles that is brought into a service facility for a Vermont state inspection. The technician follows the procedures outlined by Vermont Division of Motor Vehicles and needs to fail this car as noted by the rust we saw on the left front rotor of this car. When we read the Vermont sheet, it says conditions of brakes do not meet manufacturer specifications and or inspection requirements. It's important to note that Acura does not have a rust tolerance for brake rotors. Where did this specification come from? Where did this criteria come from? This is another state's example from Pennsylvania. You'll notice that the presence of rust or pitting by itself does not constitute a failure for the purposes of inspection. How did Vermont come up with their criteria for Vermont?
Bob, are you expecting us to do something right now?
No, I'm just.
So as noted, we have manufacturer specifications And then we have Vermont's inspection requirements. It's important to note the manufacturer does not have a rust tolerance on brake rotors. This inconsistency cost the consumer $656. While many states have eliminated their vehicle inspection process altogether, Pennsylvania does include language relative to rust.
Okay, so that at least it gives you a little bit of an understanding. As noted in the video, there's a video from Ford, video from General Motors on the braking system, to describe the braking system, how it works, and also with regards to the industry standard for measuring brake rotor minimum thickness and brake rotor runout. So, you know, that's where the industries lie. For the record, I'm an ASE Master Certified Technician, and I also have certifications with Ford, General Motors, Volkswagen, and Toyota. So I say that, just for the record.
Go ahead, Senator Berkeley.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, my question is this: surface rust versus rust that actually is causing diminished braking performance. I think that seems to be the problem of the question. And what I think that the 2019 improvements were great improvements, and what I heard, because I got into the Senate in 2019, and even though we had some hiccups just going to the tablets, but I think overall everybody was happy with the changes that were made. They were great improvements. The only issue is this rust issue and it seems like if we were just to tell people to go to Dunkin' Donuts before you get an inspection, maybe we wouldn't have a problem, because they would just get any surface rust off of there. So I wonder if we can just have maybe you don't need to rewrite the manual and go through the rule process and everything, but just clarify to the inspection stations that if the rust is not, you know, causing diminished braking performance, you don't need to fail it. Because that's what I understood Bob was saying, and what I've heard from others is that, hey, we have to fail it because there's this half-inch of rust. That's what it says, half-inch of rust. Not that it's a half-inch of rust that's diminishing braking. So I didn't know if the DMV felt there was any way to clarify that, to avoid this instances where the surface rust, even though it's not diminishing braking, is causing the inspection to fail.
And that would come up to the skill set of the 3,200 inspection mechanics and whether or not they can make a determination of whether or not those brakes are diminishing, have diminished braking ability. I don't know how they would do that.
Right. Many states use the brake skid test, didn't require a visual inspection. So for as a case in New Jersey, for the record, also I'm a Vermont inspector for cars, but for the inspection process, but I also ran a business in New Jersey, and that was an independent state-run program where they drove the car across the skid and measured the brake performance. That way there was no visual inspection. So, you know, I agree with the consistency across the 3,200 inspectors that you're referencing, that it is a challenge. There's no question about it. And then, you know, the other caveat to this is the fact that technicians are based on a flat rate billable hour kind of compensation model. So when a car comes in, there's a financial incentive for them. Not to say people are crooks. I'm not saying that. And I surely want to make sure that when we look at that Acura case study, that technician did it by the book, did a great job. He followed the rules and failed that car for rust, even though there was no drivability problems. There was no issues with the operation of the brake. It was purely for rust. And so it gets complicated. There's no question about it to ensure the consistency across the model, especially when you have a compensation plan that most technicians work under called flat rate. There's an incentive to sell work. So if there's something that they see that you know, it's a complicated endeavor for sure. The inconsistency is costing our consumers some coins. That's just the reality. And if they didn't live in Vermont, they lived in Pennsylvania. In this particular case with the Acura, I'd venture to say that the customer would not be spending the $600. And when we look at the usability, when we talk about the environment, I go around to some of these dealers and look at their scrap metal dumpster. It's filled with arguably a good product, but when we add in the rust, deciphering the rust that could wear off going on a quick trip to Dunkin' Donuts, and then we look at the effectiveness of the brake system as a whole, where 70% of the braking is in the front. So if we have a rear disc brake system, they don't get used. Even if you drove it back and forth to Dunkin' Donuts, that rust isn't going to wear off the back rotors. And so even though that system is still functioning appropriately, the rust is going to be an issue having that criteria.
So Bob, I just gotta be honest, I thought I was gonna see more that would shock me than what I'm seeing, to be fair. On that Acura, they couldn't have turned down, ground down that rotor enough to get through the pitting part of it before they failed it? Is that what it is? I mean, it's a brand new car.
Right.
It must have some thickness to the rotor.
Exactly. Yeah. So good call on that. On that particular car, the manufacturer does not recommend refinishing of the rotors. Replacement is the only method. And many cars are going that way. So as you point, the rotors start out at a certain thickness and they have to dissipate heat. So as there's a cost associated with remachining those. So, even if it wasn't the $600 to replace them, they probably would have been looking at 400 plus if they would have had to take them off, machine them, put them back on. So, in this particular case, that rust cost some coin. And again, the car's only got 9,600 miles on it. So, and then you look at over the years that we've had COVID or people working from home, the cars aren't being driven. So I appreciated the comments about taking your car out, going out for a run, if you will. That's a fair piece. But again, when we look at what we're dealing with, we're seeing a lot of customers that are driving that. Frankly, if they would have lived in another state, they wouldn't have this expenditure. So.
Bob, I'm struggling to see where we fit into this. It seems like the real issue here is education, but you're also making the case that our current manual approved by the rule process could have some amended language. I'm looking at the language from Pennsylvania that you held up, and I'd be curious to hear from maybe Scott Davidson. I'm not saying that we need a bill, although I'm one to introduce a bill for just about anything these days. That's a joke. But I'm not seeing a need for any legislative force of action to mandate this. But do you have thoughts on the specific Pennsylvania language that he has been proposing? And is that worth considering as part of our manual, Scott?
I can tell you Pennsylvania was very much part of our process in 2019. And the reason being is,
a lot of time on that whole subject back then.
yeah, the author for that was our vendor, Parsons, for ABIP. They worked on Pennsylvania's manual. They worked on their credentialing program that's online. And they were on our review process for our manual. So we worked with the same vendor and the same folks that Pennsylvania did. Where a lot of this comes down to is, I'm going to put my enforcement hat on now. If it's ambiguous and it says rust, or we try to say it affects the braking ability or the effectiveness of the brakes, it's ambiguity. So my inspectors now are going to be pitted against the inspection mechanics of, what is your opinion? I don't think that this brake affects it. I think this does. I think it doesn't. And then we're going to be arguing all the time with inspection mechanics on who's got the most experience on whether or not this affects the braking. The ambiguity is where we struggled. I know we debated Pennsylvania. We talked about the other surrounding states, and we had these conversations. But saying brake or affecting diminishing braking performance, like this said, that's really too much ambiguity, too much opinion. I don't know how I would go in front of a hearing officer and say one way or the other without something more definitive without a definition or something to present. That's why we went where we went. I wish that there was a cookie cutter approach to this. I wish there was a definitive answer. I wish that we listened to a lot of opinions and a lot of different ideas that folks had, and we tried to come up with the most common sense, reasonable standard that we possibly could.
It's just a big issue. I haven't heard about it.
That's my next question, if I may.
Yeah, right.
So I'd be really curious, either Bob or Scott, do we have any data on how many times our brake inspections fail relative per capita relative to other states since the 2018 change? Is that something, because I'd love to inform whether or not we should spend more time on this if we are disproportionately failing brakes in the great state of Vermont.
The only data I could do is I could, reach out to other states, but you're comparing apples to oranges if our standards are different. If you have a state that says rust, or a state that says excessive rust, or a state that says diminished braking performance versus a state that says a half-inch of cumulative rust, it's going to be different across the board. And sometimes it's environment. Some states use brine, some states don't. Some states don't even throw salt. It's really hard to compare that.
And I will say this: I've been in 20 years in the auto industry, and I haven't been in it since 2009. But I do remember, because I was involved with many franchises, that the foreign cars did seem to be a lot more finicky on their quality of brakes that they had on the car. I mean, I can always remember the complaint about that. But again, I'm not telling anybody not to go buy a specific brand of car or anything like that. I just think a lot of this might get back to what the manufacturers are using for parts, or even for their design standards. Maybe they're trying to cut cost, or cut weight, or cut whatever. And I don't know. I apologize, Bob. I don't see the problem. I agree with Senator Chittenden. I don't know where we could get involved with this, and everything I saw today made sense to me to why it happened the way that it happened.
I think it's a different opinion. You're always going to, whether it's black or white, you're always going to have that issue of someone saying yes or no. So we can't determine that sitting here and make that decision. You do the best you can. Let's go with it. Yes.
What we could do is get a picture of how many inspections failed for brake reasons prior to the change and then since, right? That's data that we have, and then we can see if we're in fact failing more cars for brakes with these new standards, and maybe that's a good or a bad thing. But that I think would inform my perspective sitting in this seat whether or not we should spend more time on this.
Yeah, data is difficult because the reason we went to the automated vehicle inspection program was to collect the electronic data. The paper data of the years prior with just rust are in boxes in storage in Middlesex somewhere.
There was a lot of progress made.
Yeah, I agree with that data piece. The
Yeah.
data, even with the new AVEB system, is lacking, because we had a 2017 Jeep that went in for inspection, and the dealer failed the car for brakes, happened to be brakes as well, and told the customer they needed the brake rotors, but didn't do the inspection officially. So in other words, they didn't go through the process. It was kind of a courtesy inspection, if you will. And so that obviously those type of things would influx the data. So that does become a little bit of a challenge. In that government accounting document that I provided, I believe there was mention of Pennsylvania saying something to the effect that 20% of their vehicles required some sort of work to become inspectable prior to inspection. So I think the data it is very tricky out there, especially in Vermont. That's why ultimately I think when the feds stopped dinging states for not having inspection processes, so many states dissolved their programs, right? Because the studies that they had, there's no benefit to run that process for a safety inspection. So again, it's just something to think about. We offered this testimony just as what we're seeing in the field, and we have no dog in the hunt here, so to speak. We have no financial benefit or anything that way. We're just showing what we see. So
Okay. Yes. Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think just for good government, given the number of people that I have complaining about it, that have like new cars, with even less miles than that Acura on it that are getting failed. I understand how it would be difficult to say, make a determination on whether the braking is being diminished or not. You would kind of go back to the old system of where it was the inspector deciding whether the rust was sufficient enough or not. But I think if the agency or the DMV would just try to work with us or work with the inspection stations to say this is a problem that we keep hearing about. With that surface rust isn't something that fails the inspection, because it seems to be happening where it is surface rust and that are failing vehicles. And even though the manual says you shouldn't fail it for surface rust, it seems like that's happening. So anything we can do to just educate both consumers and the inspection stations that shouldn't be happening would be, I think, to the benefit of Vermonters.
Yes, but
I completely agree with Senator Persh. Like, I don't see any action for us now, but I don't necessarily think this conversation is resolved from the emails that I've got.
I don't want to get this, like I said, they spent, God, month after month after month with 45, 50 people testifying. I thought we have a good plan now, but you're always going to have someone naturally that's going to dispute that, because it is a thin line. But where do you draw the line? Unless you're there every day to inspect that vehicle. But if an inspector's there every day, you're always going to have some little kink there somewhere. It's going to happen periodically.
We just need to keep hearing from people, and if there's
Yeah, I haven't had anybody complain to me, but
I agree with Bob. I agree with all of you. I wish I had a perfect answer. I'm not an auto mechanic, as you all know, but I put together a pretty good team, pretty competent individuals. We had a lot of debate and a lot of conversation, much like we did today. We considered everything from financial. We considered enforcement. We considered reasonableness. We tried to put a Vermont approach to it as best we could. And we came up with the best product we could. Underneath the circumstances, trying to improve the concerns that were in the previous manual dating back to 2012.
I would add one other comment too. Most of the states I think that were referenced don't have the amount of salt that we use on our roads as well. And I think that certainly comes into play with how the degradation of some of these brake parts it's going to make a difference.
we all agree that nothing's perfect. I mean, it's not like this is, so we'll keep an eye on it. And next time we need to revamp this for whatever reason, we should, I don't know, to me, this is still in my inbox, so to speak.
Thank you. Good job. Appreciate everybody. Thanks for that.
Thank you.
Thank you for carrying all that with you.
You take it off your truck.
It's staying here. You're joking.
You take it off your truck before you get over here, or what?
Yeah, now you have to put your truck together.
Yeah, I gotta put it back
Yeah,
together.
to go home.
Tony will do that for you.
It came off of his truck.
Hey, you want that? Or,
No, sir, I think it's all been
Anybody
covered.
else on the screen with us? Any questions?
No, I'm not a mechanic and I don't understand the pitting and what is half inch versus surface. To me, half inch.
How's your car, your 15-year-old car doing? Is that all right? No.
Yeah,
Okay.
well, I haven't driven it much because I'm in quarantine. I'm saving miles.
Okay. All right. Thank you for all coming this morning. Appreciate it. And that'll end the discussion this morning of this issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to get into catalytic converters, and we might as well continue right on. As everyone knows, this has been an issue. I think it's an issue not just for Vermont, it's all over. There's a lot of catalytic converters are being stolen off the cars because of the precious metals. They're being sold up to, I was surprised to learn yesterday, up to $800 worth of precious metals in these little catalytic converters. And not that we're going to solve it right away, but we thought we'd have some discussion about how we can start down that road to stopping this this big issue that many people, it's not only they're stealing the converter, the car is laid up for 2 months or so to get parts. Dealers are losing, there was one dealer I read about recently, like 29 cars that they can't sell because they wiped in one night, took all the catalytic converters off, and I've never seen one, but I understand they're very expensive to reinstall, and it takes time and you can't get parts. So we have a bill on the wall, S-48, that tries to address some of it. And I think Senator Chetna's bill with Senator Perchlik, I both be on it. Is that correct? Senator Ingalls, okay. So maybe you can, someone want to bring us up to date of what you're thinking about. I know there's a House bill, and but we have some ideas here in the Senate, which probably we can address. Thank you. Go right ahead. Yeah, see you guys. Thanks a lot.
Thank you guys very much. Good to see you guys.
Thanks for your time. Maybe I'll start off, Senator Perchlik. I've been CCing Senator Ingalls and Senator Perchlik on some emails following up to the presentation we had on Tuesday. I want to say from the outset, I think our bill S-48 is good as is. I think it makes sense and it makes it just a little bit more difficult. So I'd be happy to just move it out in its current form. I think its biggest weakness is it doesn't do enough, and I think this problem is going to continue to evolve. I found the presentation on Tuesday to be really affirming that this is worth our attention. I think Maine's examples of what Massachusetts did, they went very far into a comprehensive solution to tag, track, and manage these at points of sales. In follow-up conversations with Ledge Counsel and these emails, I don't know if I'm ready to support such a mandate because it seems to have a heavy cost to require each of the points of collection for the catalytic converters a lot more regulatory requirements. And for me to try to add that to the bill, I'd want to hear from DMV first. So it's really up to the body, this committee, if y'all want to do more testimony. But one thing I personally heard that I thought would be interesting in exploring further, and that's where there was some time this morning, so I'd love to hear the committee's thoughts before I go back to David Hall next week and sort of ask him to draft some language. But the notion of requiring catalytic converters to have a VIN associated to them when being transported from in a detached state. So I don't know the implications for this, and this is what I will work with David Hall, but similar to our revised language in this, it would be language that would only apply to non-registered commercial entities, so like individuals, but maybe making it so that if an individual is transporting detached catalytic converters that isn't a registered automotive parts dealer or parts broker, that they would be required to have a VIN number for each of those. And should they not have that VIN number, there could be a penalty associated to it that law enforcement could then use if they collect or if they pull somebody over with catalytic converters in their vehicle.
There's no VIN on it now, right?
Correct.
You'd have to write one on that if the vehicle it came from.
In Maine, they force you to imprint it. I'm not ready to say you have to engrave it because that might be pretty costly for the commercial operators. But where I'm coming from is the bill in the House, Representative Williams. She's taking another approach, which I believe was inspired from her sheriff, trying to give law enforcement an additional mechanism to react to circumstances where they pull somebody over that they suspect might have taken catalytic converters and is in possession of multiple hacked off or removed catalytic converters, but they don't currently have the tools to then hold or find that individual. So I'm not necessarily, I don't know if her bill is worth bringing into this discussion, but I am intrigued by what Maine did, which is to require that VIN number, and absent the VIN number for those assigned to and stuck on or written on the catalytic converters, that might give law enforcement enough. And I want, if the committee wants me to, I can explore this further over the next week and come back with some language. Is that enough, sir?
It seems to me we must have statutes around stolen property, and the law enforcement must deal with property that you need to develop a case that in fact it is stolen. I'm just wondering, do we have laws on the books now that I don't know, I guess the sheriff would know that, but it seems to me that just like any other situation where it appears that, the material in the vehicle is potentially stolen, we must have statutes that cover that now. I'd like to know what they are. And I guess that would get into, judiciary finding out, because if somebody's got 10 catalytic converters on the surface, it would appear that there's a high potential that they're stolen. So what kind of authority does law enforcement have now to explore whether in fact an item is stolen? Obviously a car, is, easy to determine because generally it's reported. And I saw that in fact a car got stolen right out of the state parking lot or something. So I don't know. It seemed like Maine had a very elaborate, we could explore it, but I'm not sure that that would be the first step that, little Vermont might need to take. But I'd just like to know, perhaps, and that's something maybe we can explore. What do we have now on the books relative to what law enforcement has for authority to determine whether a situation suggests that there is a high potential of stolen property being transported?
Very good.
And I can imagine, expanding on that, that the problem would be, as you said, Senator Kitchell, seeing 10 catalytic converters in there in the vehicle, you can assume that they're stolen, but with no identifying marks on where they got them from or bill of sales, or identifying even a bill of sale of where they got them. I mean, that would be the problem. Well, where did you get these? Well, I got them from such and such and such and such and such and such. Okay, well, where do they go from there? Unless they've got an identifying mark on there for them to trace it back, law enforcement's going to be stymied. Even if you took those and matched them up to the dealer lot that surprisingly had 10 catalytic converters sold the night before, they wouldn't have anywhere to go with it.
What about a junkyard? Junkyard cars, the junkyard.
So in that case, then it would be the fallback, if there's no identification, would be the bill that is before us, and that is there isn't a market for them in the same way as it's been now. But it seems to me that the 10 catalytic converters, in terms of being stolen, isn't any different than the potential of any other property that, for example, guns, or I don't know, tools, or God knows what. So that's why I'm thinking that maybe what we've talked about here could at least constrain the market so that disposition and sale of the items are made much more difficult and less lucrative.
Lieutenant?
I will definitely do some research, Senator Kitchell, on this. And one thing that comes to my mind is I feel like there are laws that if, imagine somebody gets pulled over with multiple cartons of cigarettes and they don't have the state tag, is that illegal? Like, is that a cause for a police officer to then do something? I'm wondering if there are examples in our current legal statutes that give the law enforcement in certain products and goods the rights to take more actions than we currently give them when somebody's pulled over with a bunch of
I don't know.
catalytic converters.
That's the attorneys that staff judiciary probably would be the.
It just seems like we're being asked to give them a tool to help them combat this, and we haven't come up with a solution yet on the best way to do that. Give them something so that they can go further than what they can now.
Maybe to Senator Kitchell's point, maybe I should have this conversation separately as a whole new bill. I love introducing bills, trying to be funny. So I could do that, and maybe it'll end up in judiciary, and then this bill, which is more germane just to transportation, can go elsewhere.
No, well, my point is, I'm not sure to what extent we already have sufficient authority, or the best authority we have under existing statutes for anything that is potentially stolen property. That's what I'm starting out with. What do we have now? And then the other question is, if in fact it can't be identified because of the numbers or whatever, then it seems like if we pass your bill that has these requirements on the part of the buyer, then you have made theft much less attractive because there's not a market for it.
Agreed with that. I really do. That is, so Senator Kitchell,
What?
would we even have to go to the great lengths of identifying what's already on the statutes? If we just say we're gonna put a mandate that we put a they have to put an identification number from the vehicle they took this from and just pass this bill out simply, or would you?
No, I think our bill gets us out of that law enforcement arena that, you know, we're talking about two different bills and what the sheriff might like. And that's what I was responding to, as opposed to what the bill does, which is really to make sure that whoever is accepting that item, which in many cases is high risk of being stolen, becomes much more constrained, less lucrative, only one a day, the requirements, et cetera. So I think our bill is very different. It's basically saying, if you steal it, there ain't going to be much of a market to sell it in the state of Vermont.
I like it. I'll still do some research on that, what the law enforcement currently has regarding stolen goods like this, just to inform myself, but
Yeah.
this is helpful.
You might, I guess you could check with Eric Fitzpatrick or Michelle Childs. They're the attorneys. You might just have a conversation just to see what authority is there. But that's a different issue than the bill we have before us. Your bill is to say, let's strangle the market or the ability to sell these stolen items by putting in these requirements.
The final buyer for this stuff, when a junkyard crushes cars.
Yeah.
Must take them off the cars themselves, but there's gonna be a market. They must go to someone.
Yeah, I'm sure they're going to the places that are breaking these things open and smelting them down and
There's gonna be a
deciding
buyer
that-
somewhere in the
Oh,
end.
no question. It's a probably be the precious market metal. They're probably going right back to catalytic converters, being made into catalytic converters again, somewhere along the way. You know,
Right.
it's a gift that keeps on giving.
I thought it was a couple $100. I said $800. I was surprised to hear that. Okay,
This is good. Thank you for the time.
all right. Anything else? Nothing else this morning? Okay, anything else on the screen this morning? Otherwise, we're
No.
done for today. We'll see you, Pete. So hope we're back with us.
Yeah, hope you guys are feeling better by that.
Senator Kitchell, before we drop off, can I ask you a quick question when we're off YouTube?
Yeah, I do have your email. I can